The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the purple mountains of Kishar 7 when Jiwoo heard the first explosion. She dropped her scanning device and spun around, her heart racing. Behind her, the research camp was on fire. "Hanul," she shouted, running toward the flames. Her partner emerged from the smoke, coughing and clutching a datapad to her chest. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut above her eye. "They came out of nowhere," Hanul gasped. "Vrin soldiers." Daehyun tried to fight them off, but her voice broke. Jiwoo didn't need her to finish. She could see their pilot's body lying near the burning shuttle. Daehyun had always promised he would protect them. He had kept that promise until the very end. Tall figures in dark armor surrounded them before they could run. The Vrin were a species that believed in power above all else. They took what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. Right now what they wanted was Jiwoo and Hanul. The largest Vrin stepped forward. His armor was decorated with marks of rank and battle. When he removed his helmet, his face was all sharp angles and cold eyes. This was Commander Thargol, and Jiwoo knew his reputation. He was known for his cruelty. "Dr. Park," he said, his voice like grinding metal, "we have been watching your research. You study the Kishari, the apex predators of this world. How interesting that you chose our planet for your work." "This isn't your planet," Jiwoo said quietly. "The Kishari were here long before you came." Thargol laughed, a harsh sound. "Everything we can take is ours, including the Kishari, including you." He gestured to his soldiers. "Bring them." They were dragged to a military compound hidden in the mountains. The journey took hours. Jiwoo's wrists burned where the restraints cut into her skin, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to understand what was happening. Why had the Vrin captured them instead of simply killing them? The compound was massive, built into the mountainside itself. As they were pulled through the corridors, Jiwoo saw cages. Large cages. And inside them she saw Kishari cubs. Her blood went cold. Keshari were magnificent creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall when fully grown. They had 6 powerful limbs, razor-sharp claws, and intelligence that rivaled many spacefaring species. They were also fiercely protective of their young. These cubs should have been with their families in the wild, learning to hunt and play. Instead, they were here in cages barely large enough for them to turn around. Many of the cubs bore scars. Some were too thin. All of them had a look in their eyes that Jiwoo recognized from her years of studying animals. It was the look of creatures that had been broken. "You see now," Thargol said, following her gaze. "We have been training them. The Kishari will become the perfect weapons for the Vrin Empire. They will fear us. They will obey us. They will kill for us." "This is wrong," Jiwoo whispered. "They're just children. You're torturing children." "They are tools," Thargol corrected. "And you, Dr. Park, will help us prove our methods work. You humans are so soft. You believe in kindness and compassion. You think you can befriend any creature with patience and understanding." He smiled, showing too many teeth. "Today we will show the galaxy that your way is weakness. Our way is strength." Hanul was pulled away, shouting Jiwoo's name. Jiwoo tried to reach for her, but the soldiers held her tight. She watched helplessly as her friend was dragged down a different corridor. Thargol led Jiwoo to a large circular room. It was an arena. Above she could see observation windows where Vrin officers were gathering to watch. Below, the floor was stained with old blood. Her stomach twisted. "Your human methods have failed before they even began," Thargol announced to his audience. "Watch as our weapons destroy the one who would show them mercy." The soldiers released Jiwoo and shoved her into the center of the arena. She stumbled but caught herself. The arena was maybe 30 meters across. There was nowhere to hide and no way out. Heavy doors surrounded the space, all sealed shut. One of the doors began to open with a grinding sound. Jiwoo's heart hammered in her chest. She knew what was coming. 6 Kishari cubs entered the arena. They were young, maybe a year old, but each was already the size of a large bear. Their muscles rippled under their dark fur. Their claws scraped against the stone floor. Their eyes were fixed on her, and she could see the confusion in them. They had been trained to attack, but something in them was resisting. The cubs moved forward slowly, spreading out to surround her. This was a hunting formation. They had been taught well. Jiwoo could hear Thargol's voice echoing from above, giving commands in the Vrin language. The cubs tensed, ready to charge. Jiwoo closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought of Daehyun, who had died protecting them. She thought of Hanul, locked away somewhere in this horrible place. She thought of all the years she had spent studying animals, learning their languages, understanding their hearts. Then she opened her eyes and did something that no Vryn would ever do. She knelt down. Slowly, carefully, she lowered herself until she was on one knee. She made herself smaller, less threatening. She extended one hand, palm up, fingers relaxed, and she spoke. "It's okay," she said softly. "I know you're scared. I know they hurt you. I know you don't want to do this." The cubs hesitated. Their formation broke slightly as they tilted their heads, listening. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. This was not what their trainers had taught them to expect. "You're not weapons," Jiwoo continued, her voice steady despite her fear. "You're children. You're beautiful, strong, and you deserve so much better than this." One of the cubs, larger than the others, took a step closer. Its nostrils flared as it smelled her. Jiwoo didn't move. She barely breathed. She just kept her hand extended and her eyes soft. The large cub moved even closer. It lowered its head toward her hand. Jiwoo could feel its warm breath on her palm. For a long moment, nothing happened. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly the cub sat down at her feet. Above them, she could hear shocked voices. Thargol was shouting commands, his voice rising in anger. But Jiwoo kept her focus on the cubs. One by one, the others approached. One by one, they settled around her in a circle. Not attacking. Not threatening. Protecting. The largest cub pressed its head against Jiwoo's shoulder. She felt tears running down her face as she gently touched its scarred fur. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." In that moment, surrounded by 6 massive predators who had chosen kindness over killing, Jiwoo Park knew that everything was about to change. The Vryn had tried to prove that cruelty made strength. Instead, they had just shown the galaxy something far more powerful. They had shown that even the most broken hearts could still choose love. The arena fell silent except for the sound of Jiwoo's breathing and the soft rumbles coming from the cubs around her. She could feel their warmth, their weight as they pressed close to her. The largest one, which she had already started thinking of as Buell, kept its head on her shoulder as if refusing to let her go. Above them, the observation windows erupted in chaos. Vryn officers shouted at each other in their harsh language. Jiwoo didn't need to understand their words to know they were angry and confused. This had not been part of their plan. A door at the side of the arena opened. A Vryn in trainer's gear strode in, carrying what looked like a control device. This had to be Vexenor, the one responsible for breaking these cubs. His face was twisted in fury. "Move away from the human," he barked at the cubs. When they didn't respond, he pressed a button on his device. The cubs jerked and whimpered. Jiwoo felt Buell tense against her, saw the others cringe. They were being shocked. Rage flooded through her chest, hot and fierce. "Stop it!" she screamed, surging to her feet. "Stop hurting them!" Vexenor smiled cruelly and pressed the button again. But this time, something different happened. The cubs didn't back away from Jiwoo. Instead, they moved forward, placing themselves between her and the trainer. Buell's lips pulled back, showing rows of sharp teeth. A deep growl rumbled from its chest. The trainer's smile vanished. He backed toward the door, pressing the button over and over. But the cubs kept advancing. They weren't attacking him, not yet. They were warning him. "Stay away from her." The door slammed shut behind him as he fled. Thargol's voice boomed through speakers built into the arena walls. "You have corrupted our weapons, human. You will remain in that arena for 3 days with no food and no water. We will see how long your compassion lasts when you are dying of thirst. We will see if these creatures still protect you when their own hunger takes over." The lights in the arena dimmed. Jiwoo heard heavy locks engaging on all the doors. She was trapped here with 6 massive predators, and the Vryn expected them to eventually turn on her. But Jiwoo wasn't thinking about herself. She was looking at the cubs, really seeing them for the first time. Now that she was close, she could see all the damage that had been done to them. Old scars crisscrossed their bodies. Their fur was patchy in places where it had been burned or torn. Several of them were too thin, their ribs visible under their dark coats. She knelt down again and gently touched Buell's shoulder. The cub leaned into her touch, its eyes closing. "What have they done to you?" she whispered. For the rest of that first day, Jiwoo examined each cub as carefully as she could. She used torn pieces of her shirt to clean their worst wounds. She spoke to them constantly, keeping her voice low and soothing. She told them about Earth, about the animals she had studied there, about how creatures were meant to live free and happy. The cubs listened. They crowded around her, sometimes resting their heads in her lap, sometimes just sitting close enough to touch her. Jiwoo realized something that the Vryn had never understood. Kashari weren't solitary hunters. They were pack animals. They needed family. They needed connection. The Vryn had tried to break that instinct out of them, to make them into lone killing machines. But you couldn't destroy something that was built into a creature's very nature. Night fell. The arena grew cold. Jiwoo's throat was already dry and her stomach ached with hunger, but she didn't complain. The cubs were hungry too. She could hear their stomachs growling. They had probably been starved as part of their training, food used as a reward for violence. As the temperature dropped, the cubs pressed closer. Their body heat surrounded her like a living blanket. Buell curved itself around her back while the others formed a protective circle. Even in their own pain and hunger, they were taking care of her. Through a small crack in the arena wall, Jiwoo saw a familiar face. Hanul was pressed against the bars of a holding cell on the other side. Her friend was too far away to speak to, but Jiwoo could see her eyes were red from crying. She raised one hand in a small wave. Hanul waved back, then pressed her fist to her heart. Stay strong. The second day was harder. Jiwoo's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her head pounded. Every movement felt like dragging herself through mud. The cubs weren't doing much better. They barely moved, conserving their energy. But whenever Jiwoo swayed or stumbled, they were there to steady her. In the observation rooms above, Jiwoo could sometimes see Vryn officers watching. Most looked satisfied, as if they expected her to collapse at any moment, but one officer kept returning to the window. His armor marked him as a lieutenant. He would stand there for long periods just watching. His expression was hard to read. On the second night, Jiwoo finally collapsed. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't hold her. The world spun and darkened around the edges. She heard the cubs making distressed sounds, their calls echoing off the arena walls. Buell bent down and gently grasped Jiwoo's jacket in its teeth, trying to lift her. When that didn't work, it lay down beside her and pulled her close with one massive paw. The other cubs huddled around them both, creating a protective cocoon of warmth and fur. Jiwoo drifted in and out of consciousness. She had fever dreams of Earth, of running through green forests with animals at her side. Sometimes she thought she heard voices arguing in Vryn. Sometimes she felt something cool against her lips. When she finally woke up, it was to find a small water container lying near her head. The cubs were all standing now, alert and tense. They were staring at the arena entrance where several Vryn guards stood with weapons drawn. One of the guards, a female with medic symbols on her armor, held up her empty hands. "I brought water," she said in heavily accented human language. Nothing more. Jiwoo's hand shook as she unscrewed the container and drank. The water was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She wanted to drain the whole thing, but she forced herself to stop after a few sips. Instead, she poured some into her cupped hand and offered it to Buell. The cub lapped at the water gratefully. Jiwoo shared the rest with the other cubs, giving them each a turn until the container was empty. The Vryn medic watched this with an expression Jiwoo couldn't quite identify. Then she turned and left, the guards following her. The third day arrived. Jiwoo was weak but alive. The small amount of water and the cubs' warmth had kept her going. She spent the day talking to them, learning their individual personalities. Besides Buell, there was a smaller, gentler cub she named Hanul after her friend. There was a fierce one with a torn ear she called Duri, which meant two because it seemed to always be looking in two directions at once. The others she named Bam, Haru, and Miso. That evening, all the doors to the arena suddenly opened. Thargol entered, flanked by guards. The cubs immediately formed a defensive wall in front of Jiwoo. Their hackles were raised and their claws extended. "Impressive," Thargol said, though his voice dripped with anger. "You have survived 3 days. But this proves nothing. These creatures are defective. They have failed their training." "No," said a voice from behind him. The lieutenant Jiwoo had seen watching stepped forward. "They have not failed. We have failed. This human has done in 3 days what we could not do in months. She has earned their loyalty. Perhaps it is time we asked ourselves why our methods produce weapons that turn against us, while her methods produce guardians." Thargol's face twisted with rage. "You dare question me, Skrull?" "I question our entire approach," Skrull replied calmly. "And I am not alone." He gestured to several other officers who had gathered behind him. They all wore expressions of doubt. Thargol looked around at his subordinates, seeing the rebellion growing in their ranks. His hand moved to his weapon. "If these creatures will not serve the Vryn Empire," he said slowly, "then they will die. Along with the human, and anyone who stands with her." He turned and strode from the arena, shouting orders. Alarms began to blare throughout the compound. Jiwoo didn't understand the Vryn words, but she understood the meaning. Thargol had activated some kind of final protocol. Whatever he had planned, it was going to be bad. Skrull moved quickly to Jiwoo's side. "Can you walk?" he asked urgently. Jiwoo nodded, though she had to lean on Buell to stand. "What's happening?" "The commander has activated the base self-destruct. We have 20 minutes to get everyone out." Skrull looked at the 6 cubs, then back at Jiwoo. "I hope you can run." The compound shook as explosions began going off in the lower levels. Jiwoo stumbled, and Buell pressed against her side to keep her upright. The 6 cubs moved with her as one unit, never letting her fall behind. Skrull led them through corridors filled with smoke and panic. Other Vryn soldiers ran past them, some toward escape pods, others trying to save equipment or data. A few stopped and stared at the sight of cubs following a human, but none tried to stop them. Everyone was too focused on their own survival. "We need to get to the detention cells," Jiwoo gasped, her lungs burning. "Hanul is still trapped there." Skrull nodded and changed direction. They ran down a side passage where the alarm lights flashed red against the walls. More explosions rocked the compound, closer now. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. The cubs lowered their bodies, ready to shield Jiwoo if anything fell. They reached the detention block to find Hanul's cell still locked. She stood at the bars, gripping them so hard her knuckles were white. "Jiwoo!" she cried out when she saw them. Skrull pulled out a security override device and pressed it to the lock. Nothing happened. He tried again, cursing in Vryn. "The system is failing. The explosions must have damaged the power grid." Jiwoo looked at Buell. The massive cub met her eyes, and she could see the intelligence there. "Can you help?" she asked softly. Buell moved to the cell door and examined the bars. Then it reared back and slammed both front paws into the lock mechanism. The metal screeched and bent. The other cubs joined in, their claws finding purchase in the damaged metal. Together they wrenched the door completely off its frame. Hanul rushed out and threw her arms around Jiwoo. Both women held each other tight for a moment, tears streaming down their faces. Then another explosion shook them apart, and they were running again. As they ran, Jiwoo noticed other cells with prisoners inside. There were other species here, all locked away by the Vryn. "We can't leave them," she said, stopping. "We don't have time." Skrull protested, but Jiwoo was already directing the cubs to the next cell door. The cubs tore through locks and bars with remarkable efficiency. Prisoners poured out, their faces showing shock and gratitude. Some were species Jiwoo had never seen before. All had been suffering under Vryn captivity. Hanul guided them toward the nearest exit while Jiwoo and the cubs freed more cells. A group of Vryn guards appeared at the end of the corridor, weapons raised. But before they could fire, the Vryn medic who had brought Jiwoo water stepped between them. Her name was Kira, Jiwoo would later learn. "Lower your weapons," Kira commanded. "Let them pass." The commander ordered their deaths, one guard said, but his voice was uncertain. "The commander is destroying this entire base," Kira shot back. "He would kill us all rather than admit he was wrong. I will not follow orders from a leader who values pride over life." She looked at the other guards. "Choose. Follow a mad commander to your death or help innocent beings escape." One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. Some even moved to help, guiding prisoners toward escape routes. The Vryn Empire's absolute control was cracking, and everyone could feel it. They reached the main hangar where ships were docked. The massive space was chaos. Vryn were fighting each other now, some still loyal to Thargol, others joining Skrull's growing rebellion. Fires burned everywhere, and the ceiling was starting to collapse in sections. Skrull led them toward a transport ship, but as they ran across the hangar floor, a figure stepped into their path. It was Thargol, his armor scorched and damaged, his face twisted with absolute fury. "You destroyed everything," he snarled at Jiwoo. "My authority, my base, my weapons, all because you showed weakness to creatures too stupid to appreciate strength." He raised a massive plasma cannon, aiming it directly at her heart. Jiwoo stood frozen. This was it. She had survived so much only to die now. But Buell moved faster than Jiwoo thought possible. The cub placed itself directly between her and the weapon. The other 5 cubs formed a line beside their sibling. They didn't roar or snarl. They simply stood there, a living wall, making it clear what would happen if Thargol fired. To kill Jiwoo, he would have to kill them first. "They're protecting you," Thargol said, his voice full of disbelief and rage. "They choose you over their own survival." "This is impossible." Jiwoo stepped forward, placing her hand on Buell's back. She was still weak, still exhausted, but her voice was steady. "It's not impossible. It's what happens when you treat living beings with kindness instead of cruelty. They're not weapons, Commander. They never were. They're people, just like you and me, and people, when given the choice, will always choose love over fear. Love is weakness," Thargol spat. "Fear is control." "No," Skrull said, stepping up beside Jiwoo. "Fear is what made us follow you. Love is what made us stop." He gestured to the Vryn around them, many of whom had ceased fighting to watch this confrontation. "Your way created soldiers who rebel. Her way created guardians who would die for her. Tell me, Commander, which is true strength?" Thargol's hand trembled on his weapon. For a moment, Jiwoo thought he might fire anyway. Might kill them all out of pure spite. But then the hangar's main support beam cracked with a sound like thunder. The ceiling began to come down. "Run!" Skrull shouted. Everyone scattered. Jiwoo felt the cubs pushing her forward, moving her toward the transport ship. Behind them, she heard a scream as falling debris caught someone. She hoped it wasn't Thargol despite everything. She didn't want anyone to die. They reached the transport just as another section of ceiling collapsed. Hanul was already at the controls, having spent years studying various spacecraft designs. "Everyone in!" she shouted. The humans, the freed prisoners, and the Vryn who had chosen to help them all piled into the ship. But there was a problem. The cubs were too big to fit inside. "The hull," Hanul said quickly. "They can ride on the exterior. Keshari have strong grips and thick hides. They should survive the journey to orbit if we keep the speed down." Jiwoo looked at Buell. "Can you do this?" she asked. The cub rumbled deep in its chest and moved to the ship's exterior. Its claws found holes in the hull plating. The other cubs followed its example, spreading out across the ship's surface. They looked back at Jiwoo through the viewports, their eyes trusting. "Hold on," Jiwoo whispered, pressing her hand to the glass where Buell's face was. "Just hold on." Anul fired up the engines. The transport lifted off just as the hangar completely collapsed behind them. They shot through the opening doors and into the purple sky of Keshar 7, but they weren't safe yet. As they climbed toward orbit, alarms began blaring. Hanul's face went pale as she checked the sensors. "We have a problem," she said quietly. "A big problem." On the view screen, ships appeared. Huge ships. A Vryn battle fleet, at least 20 warships strong, was emerging from hyperspace directly ahead of them. "They must have received the base's distress signal," Skrull said, his voice heavy. "We cannot fight them. We cannot outrun them. We are trapped." Jiwoo stared at the massive warships filling the screen. After everything they had survived, it seemed impossible that it would end like this. But then she looked at Buell through the viewport, still clinging to the hull despite the wind and the cold. The cub met her eyes, and in that moment Jiwoo had an idea. It was crazy. It was dangerous, but it might be their only chance. "Hanul," she said slowly, "can you land us back on the planet?" "What? Why would we go back down?" Jiwoo smiled even though her heart was racing. "Because I need to have a conversation with some very large, very angry predators. And I think they might be interested in knowing what the Vryn have been doing to their children." Hanul stared at Jiwoo like she had lost her mind. "You want to land back on Keshar 7? With a fleet of warships above us?" "Jiwoo, that's suicide." "Maybe," Jiwoo admitted. "But think about it. The Vryn have been stealing Keshari cubs for their weapons program. They've been torturing them, breaking them, trying to turn them into tools. What do you think the adult Keshari would do if they knew?" Skrull's eyes widened as he understood. "The wild prides. You want to bring them into this fight." "Not to fight," Jiwoo corrected. "To protect. The Vryn avoided the wild Keshari territories because they're too dangerous to control. But what if we could show them we're not the enemy? What if we could show them their stolen children?" A communication signal beeped on the control panel. Hanul opened the channel and a voice filled the cabin. It was speaking human language with a slight accent. "Vryn transport vessel, this is Human Confederation scout ship Sabiok. We picked up your distress beacon. Do you need assistance?" Ji-woo grabbed the communicator. "This is Dr. Ji-woo Park. Yes, we desperately need help. We have escaped prisoners, defecting Vryn soldiers, and 6 Kashari cubs. We're being pursued by a Vryn battle fleet." There was a pause. Then a different voice came through, female and steady. "Dr. Park, this is Captain Young-Mi Lee. We're scanning your situation now. That's a big fleet. Our ship is fast, but we can't take on 20 warships." "I have a plan," Ji-woo said, "but I need you to trust me. Can you provide cover while we land in the wild Kashari territories?" Another pause. "Those territories are extremely dangerous, Doctor." "I know, that's exactly why we're going there." Young-Mi made a decision. "All right, we're coming in. My co-pilot, Bora, is already plotting an intercept course. But Dr. Park, whatever you're planning, you better do it fast." The small scout ship Sabiak dropped out of a higher orbit and positioned itself between the transport and the approaching Vryn fleet. It was tiny compared to the warships, but it began laying down covering fire, buying precious seconds. Hanol dove the transport back toward the planet's surface. The ship shook as they hit the atmosphere too fast. Through the viewports, Ji-woo could see the cubs clinging to the hull, their bodies pressed flat against the metal. The wind screamed around them. She held her breath, praying they would hold on. They dropped below the cloud layer and the massive purple forests of Kashar 7 spread out below them. Hanul aimed for a clearing near the base of the mountains, far from any Vryn installations. The landing was rough, the ship bouncing twice before settling into the soft ground. The cubs dropped from the hull immediately, shaking themselves and checking for injuries. Ji-woo rushed out to them. Biol had a few scrapes, and its fur was windblown, but all 6 cubs had survived the descent. They pressed close to her, rumbling with relief. "Now what?" Hanul asked, joining her outside. The others were disembarking too, freed prisoners and Vryn rebels alike, all looking around nervously at the dense forest surrounding them. "Now we wait," Ji-woo said quietly, "and hope that the wild Kishari find us before the Vryn do." They didn't have to wait long. The forest around them grew silent in that particular way that meant predators were near. The freed prisoners huddled closer to the ship. Even Skral and his Vryn soldiers looked nervous. They had all heard stories about the wild Kashari prides. Then they appeared. Massive shapes moving between the trees, each one twice the size of the cubs. Their fur was darker, their claws longer, their eyes sharp with intelligence and wariness. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, emerging from the forest like shadows given form. At the center of the pride was the largest Kashari Ji-woo had ever seen. This had to be the matriarch, the leader of the pride. She was ancient and scarred, with silver running through her dark fur. Her eyes were deep and knowing. She looked at the gathered group, at the ship, at the Vryn soldiers. Then her gaze fell on the 6 cubs. The cubs began making sounds Ji-woo had never heard from them before. Not the distressed calls or the hunting rumbles they had been trained to make. These were different sounds, complex and varied. They were speaking in their own language, telling their story to the matriarch. The matriarch moved forward, and every wild Kashari moved with her like a wave. She approached the cubs, sniffing them, examining them. She saw their scars. She saw how thin they were. She saw the fear that still lived in their eyes despite Ji-woo's care. Then the matriarch turned her gaze to Ji-woo. The human felt the full weight of that stare, the intelligence and power behind those eyes. This was a being that had lived for decades, that had led her people through countless challenges. She was judging Ji-woo, deciding if she was threat or ally. Ji-woo did the only thing she could think of. She knelt down, just as she had in the arena. She extended her hand slowly, showing the matriarch the same respect and trust she had shown the cubs. "I'm sorry," she said, even though she didn't know if the matriarch could understand her words. The emotion would carry through, she hoped. "I'm so sorry for what was done to them. I tried to protect them. I'm still trying." The matriarch stepped closer. She lowered her massive head and sniffed Ji-woo's extended hand. Then she did something that made everyone gasp. She gently touched her nose to Ji-woo's palm, the same gesture of trust that Buell had shown days ago in the arena. Buell moved to stand beside the matriarch, and Jiwoo suddenly understood. The matriarch wasn't just the pride leader. She was Buell's mother. All 6 cubs had been stolen from this pride, torn from their families while they were still young. Tears streamed down Jiwoo's face as she watched the reunion. The cubs pressed against their mother, making soft sounds of joy and grief mixed together. The other wild Kashari surrounded them, welcoming the lost children home. But the moment was shattered by the roar of engines overhead. Vryn dropships were descending, having tracked them from orbit. The fleet had sent ground forces to capture or kill them all. The matriarch's head snapped up. She saw the ships, saw the Vryn soldiers beginning to pour out, and she understood. These were the ones who had stolen her children. These were the ones who had hurt them. She let out a roar that shook the trees. Every wild Kashari in the forest answered. The sound was like thunder, like an earthquake, like the voice of the planet itself rising in fury. The Vryn soldiers faltered. They had trained the cubs through pain and fear, but they had never faced adult Kashari in their own territory, fighting to protect their young. This was different. This was nature itself pushing back. The Kashari pride attacked as one coordinated force. They moved through the Vryn soldiers like a storm, not killing but driving them back, forcing them away from the cubs, away from Jiwoo and her group. It was a display of power and protection that left everyone stunned. The Vryn soldiers retreated to their dropships and took off, fleeing back to orbit. The Kashari didn't pursue. They had made their point. This was their world, and the cubs were under their protection now. Young Mi's voice crackled through Jiwoo's communicator. Dr. Park, what just happened down there? We're reading massive life signs all around your position. The wild Kashari, Jiwoo said, still shaking with adrenaline. They're protecting the cubs. They're protecting all of us. Well, you might want to tell them to stand by, Young Mi replied grimly. The Vryn fleet is moving into bombardment position. They're going to level the entire area from orbit. Jiwoo looked at the matriarch, at Buell and the other cubs, at the hundreds of wild Kashari surrounding them. They had come so far. They had survived so much. It couldn't end like this. Skrull, she said urgently, you have access to Vryn military channels, right? Yes, but they will not listen to a traitor. They might listen to the truth. Jiwoo turned to Hanul. Do we still have the security footage from the compound? The recordings of what they did to the cubs? Hanul checked her data pad. I grabbed everything I could before we escaped. The training sessions, the punishment protocols, all of it. Jiwoo smiled. It was time to show the galaxy what the Vryn Empire had really been doing on this planet. It was time to make them answer for their crimes. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start something new. Something better. Skrull, she said. Open a channel. Broadcast to the entire fleet. I want everyone to see this. I want everyone to know what happens when you try to weaponize love. Skrull's hands shook as he entered the command codes to override the fleet's communication security. This was his final act of rebellion against everything the Vryn Empire had taught him. When the channel opened, his voice would reach every ship in the fleet, every soldier, every officer. There would be no going back. This is Lieutenant Skrull to all Vryn vessels, he began. I am transmitting visual data from the Kashar-7 compound. What you are about to see is the truth of our weapons program. It is the truth of what we have become. The footage began to play across every screen in the fleet. It showed the cubs in their cages, too small, too scared. It showed Vexenor and his trainers using shock devices, pain as a teaching tool. It showed cubs crying out in distress, trying to curl up and hide from the torment. It showed what the Vryn Empire had been doing in secret, what they had been too ashamed to show their own people. Then the footage changed. It showed Jiwoo in the arena, kneeling before the cubs. It showed them choosing her, protecting her, forming a family with her. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Cruelty had created suffering. Kindness had created loyalty. We tried to make them fear us. Skrull's voice continued over the footage. This human taught them to trust. We created weapons that turned against us. She created guardians who would die for her. I ask you all now as soldiers, as beings with honor, which is true strength. On the bridge of the fleet's command ship, Admiral Krathor watched the footage with an expression that slowly shifted from anger to something else. He was old enough to remember when the Vryn Empire had been different, before conquest became their only goal. He touched the communication controls. "This is Admiral Crethor to all ships. Hold fire." His voice was heavy with thought. "Lieutenant Skrull, I'm opening a direct channel to your position. I wish to speak with a human." Jiwoo took the communicator from Skrull, her heart pounding. She was about to speak to the commander of an entire battle fleet. One wrong word and they would all die. But when she opened her mouth, she didn't think about politics or diplomacy. She just spoke from her heart. "Admiral, my name is Dr. Jiwoo Park. I'm a xenobiologist. My job is to study and understand other species. When I came to Kishar 7, I wanted to learn about the Kishari, to appreciate them, to help others see how magnificent they are. What I found instead was your empire's attempt to break them, to turn them into things they were never meant to be." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Around her, the Keshari pride waited silently. The matriarch stood at her side, and somehow Jiwoo drew strength from that presence. "You wanted to prove that dominance creates loyalty," Jiwoo continued. "But you were wrong. Dominance creates fear, and fear creates rebellion. The moment those cubs had a choice, they chose kindness over cruelty. The moment your soldiers saw a better way, many of them chose that too. Even now, standing here, I'm surrounded by Kishari who could kill me in seconds. But they don't. Do you know why?" "Tell me." Crethor's voice came back, and Jiwoo was surprised to hear genuine curiosity in it. "Because I showed their children respect. Because I treated them like the intelligent, feeling beings they are. Because I gave them a choice and they chose to trust me. You can't weaponize that, Admiral. You can't militarize compassion. And you can't conquer something you refuse to understand." There was a long silence. On the command bridge, Crethor looked around at his crew. Many of them had watched the footage. Many of them looked troubled, questioning. He had seen this kind of doubt before, in other campaigns, other wars. It was the beginning of the end of absolute loyalty. "Dr. Park," he said finally, "you have embarrassed the Vryn Empire today. You have turned our own creations against us. You have made us look weak in front of the galaxy." Jiwoo waited for the weapons to fire, for the end to come, but Crethor wasn't finished. "You have also," he continued slowly, "shown us something we needed to see. Perhaps our methods have become too harsh. Perhaps we have forgotten that strength comes in many forms. I will not fire on your position, Doctor. You and your allies will be allowed to leave. The cubs may remain with their families. Consider this a gesture of good faith. But know this," and here his voice hardened, "the Vryn Empire does not forget. We will be watching. If you speak of what happened here, if you spread your ideas further, there will be consequences." Jiwoo looked at Hanul, at Skrull, at all the beings who had risked everything to do what was right. Then she looked at the matriarch, at Buell and the other cubs, at the wild pride surrounding them. She smiled. "Admiral," she said clearly, "I hope you never forget. I hope this day stays with you and every soldier in your fleet. Because the galaxy needs to know what I learned here. The galaxy needs to know that love is stronger than fear, that compassion is stronger than cruelty, and that no matter how much power you have, you cannot break the spirit of those who choose to stand together." She turned to the matriarch and gently placed her hand on the great Kishari's shoulder. The gesture was returned, the matriarch's massive paw resting lightly on Jiwoo's back. It was a statement clear for all to see. Human and Kishari standing together, equals, friends. "I'm returning your children to you," Jiwoo said softly to the matriarch. "They were stolen, hurt, broken. But they survived. They're still here. And with time and love, they'll heal." The matriarch rumbled deep in her chest, a sound that carried complex meaning. Then she did something extraordinary. She moved to each of the 6 cubs and gently pushed them forward, toward Jiwoo. The message was clear. "These are my children, but they have chosen you as well. Honor that bond." Boyle approached Jiwoo and pressed its head against her chest. The other cubs gathered around, and for a moment they stood together one last time. The human who had saved them and the creatures who had taught her about courage. "I have to go," Jiwoo whispered, tears streaming freely now. "You need to be with your family. You need to be free. But I'll never forget you. Any of you." Young Mi's ship descended to pick them up. The Sabyuk landed in the clearing, and its crew emerged to help load the freed prisoners and the defecting Vryn. Through it all, the wild Kishari watched peacefully. They had made their choice. They would let these strangers leave in peace. As Jiwoo climbed aboard the ship, she looked back one final time. The 6 cubs stood with the matriarch and the pride. They were home, They were safe. Buell raised its head and let out a call, long and mournful and beautiful. It wasn't goodbye. It was thank you. The ship lifted off, and Jiwoo watched through the viewport as the Kishari grew smaller below. The Vryn fleet parted to let them pass. True to his word, Krathor did not fire. They jumped to hyperspace, leaving Kesher 7 behind. The journey back to human space took several days. During that time, news of what happened on Kesher 7 spread like wildfire through the galaxy. Skrall's broadcast had reached far beyond just the Vryn fleet. Other species who had suffered under the Vryn Empire's rule saw the footage and found hope. Rebellions began on a dozen worlds. The Empire's grip started to weaken. Jiwoo spent most of the journey writing. She documented everything that had happened, every detail of her time with the Cubs, every lesson she had learned about compassion and connection. Hanul helped her organize it into a proposal for the Human Confederation. They called it the Interspecies Compassion Protocol. When they finally reached Earth, Jiwoo expected to be debriefed and dismissed. Instead, she was met with crowds. People had seen the footage. They had watched her kneel before the Cubs, had seen her risk everything to protect them. She had become a symbol of what humanity could be at its best. The Confederation approved her protocol. They established a new branch dedicated to peaceful interspecies relations and understanding. Hanul signed on immediately as Jiwoo's partner. Youngmi and Bora requested transfers to provide transportation and protection. Even Skrall and the other defecting Vryn were granted asylum and became advisors, teaching others what not to do. 6 months later, Jiwoo returned to Kesher 7. This time she had official authorization, a team of researchers, and permission from the Vryn Empire itself, which was slowly reforming under pressure from its own people and the galactic community. Their ship landed in the same clearing where she had said goodbye. Jiwoo stepped out, her heart racing. Would they remember her? Would they welcome her back? The forest rustled and the pride emerged. They were larger now, healthier, and leading them were 6 familiar shapes. The Cubs had grown in the months apart, their muscles filling out, their scars fading. They were becoming the magnificent creatures they were always meant to be. Biol approached first. It was massive now, nearly as large as its mother had been, but when it reached Jiwoo, it became gentle. It lowered its head and pressed its nose to her palm, just as it had done that first day in the arena. The other 5 surrounded her, a circle of protection and affection. The matriarch watched from nearby, her ancient eyes warm with approval. Jiwoo sank to her knees and wrapped her arms around Buell's neck, burying her face in its fur. "You remember?" she whispered. "You remember me?" Hanul stood beside her, tears in her eyes. "How could they forget? You saved them. You showed them what love looks like." Jiwoo looked around at the pride, at her team, at the beautiful world of Kesher 7 spreading out around them. The Vryn had tried to weaponize these magnificent creatures.